The silence that followed the word husband was not merely the absence of sound. It was a physical weight, a sudden increase in the station's artificial gravity that seemed to pin my tongue to the roof of my mouth. In the command hub of the Zenith Nexus, 37 sentient beings from 11 different star systems simultaneously forgot how to breathe. I looked at the translation display on my wrist. The letters were glowing a soft, unforgiving blue. In English, it was husband. In the clicking dialect of the Skrill, it was primary hive mate. In the mathematical pulses of the binary union, it was 1-0 prime. Every single one of them meant the same thing. I had just been claimed by the most dangerous woman in 3 sectors. General Zilia, the supreme guardian of the Obsidian Reach, stood as still as a statue carved from starlight. Her skin, usually a shimmering charcoal gray, had flared into a brilliant, pulsing violet, the Vorax color for deep, unguarded vulnerability. She wasn't looking at the holographic tactical maps anymore. She wasn't looking at the terrified junior officers who were dropping their data pads. She was looking at me. Calum Thorne, the synapse mesh around her throat whispered, though the machine sounded like it was struggling to keep up with the melodic trill of her actual voice. I have spoken. I tried to swallow. It felt like I was trying to digest a piece of the pulsar spinning outside the reinforced windows. My diplomatic training, 20 years of learning how to de-escalate tensions between species that ate their own young and species that worship sentient gas clouds, completely evaporated. Right, I managed to croak. My voice sounded thin, like a cheap radio signal lost in a solar storm. So, that happened. Behind her, High Arbiter Vaughn looked like he was about to have a literal meltdown. His bioluminescence was a jagged, angry red. He took a step forward, his hand hovering over the hilt of a pulse blade that could split a tank in half. Liaison, Vaughn hissed, the translation coming through as a serrated edge of sound. Explain this blasphemy. The general is joking. Humans joke. It is your primary cultural export after bad movies and high fructose corn syrup. Tell me this is a joke before I have to clean your remains off the deck plating. I looked at Xylia. Her ears, long and tapered like elegant blades, were tilted forward, the Vorax sign of absolute focus. She was waiting for me to bail her out. She was waiting for me to say it was a misunderstanding, to give her the out her culture demanded. But here was the problem. 3 minutes ago, I had told her she was amazing. I had said it because she had just solved a 3-body orbital defense problem that had been melting my brain for a week. I had said it with a grin, a verbal high five, as we humans say, and she had laughed. Not the polite rhythmic chirping she used for diplomats. She had laughed with her whole body, a sound like glass bells in a windstorm, and then she had said the word. Actually, Arbiter, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I think we're past the joking stage. We might need a bigger room, and probably some much stronger coffee. The command hub exploded into a cacophony of screeching, clicking, and shouting. Security alerts began to chime in 22 different frequencies. Above it all, I saw Zilia's violet glow deepen. For a terrifying, beautiful second, she smiled. It was a predator's smile, full of sharp teeth and ancient secrets. "Move it!" someone yelled in the background. "The brass is coming." I realized then that my life as a quiet, coffee-addicted diplomat was KIA. I wasn't just Calum Thorne anymore. I was a diplomatic incident with 2 legs and a very uncertain future. If you asked me 6 months ago how I'd end up as the galaxy's most famous husband-to-be, I would have laughed in your face and offered you a lukewarm cup of Nexus Blend caffeine. To understand how we got to the great hub silence, you have to understand the Zenith Nexus. The station is a marvel of engineering and a nightmare of interior design. It's where the Soul Collective's form follows function philosophy meets the Vorax's everything must look like a Gothic cathedral made of shadows. Walking through the corridors is like being stuck in a permanent argument between a minimalist architect and a high fantasy set designer. I'd been stationed here for exactly 182 days. My job was simple on paper: ensure that when the humans and the Vorax talked about mutual security, they were actually talking about the same thing. In reality, it meant I spent most of my time explaining that Aggressive negotiations, in human terms, didn't involve ritual decapitation, and that when a Vorax said they wanted to incorporate our essence, they usually just meant a trade deal for rare earth minerals. "Thorne, you look like hammered crap," Lieutenant Sarah Miller said, leaning against my desk with a smirk. This was 3 months into my tour. She was one of the few humans on the station who didn't treat me like a walking liability. "The coffee machine in Sector 4 is broken again, Sarah," I grumbled, rubbing my eyes. "The Vorax technicians tried to optimize it. Now it only serves liquid that tastes like ozone and regret." "Farking squids," she chuckled. "They can build a Dyson sphere but can't figure out a French press. You heading to the tactical briefing?" "Unfortunately, General Xylia is presenting the new patrol routes for the Obsidian Reach. I have to make sure she doesn't accidentally claim Sector 7 as a private hunting ground." "Good luck with that. She's a piece of work, that one. I saw her bench press a cargo loader last week just because it was in her way." "She's efficient," I said, a bit too quickly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "She's a killing machine with legs that go on for 3 light years. Just keep your eyes on the maps, Kay. You know the brass. They're looking for any excuse to say we're compromised by the alien aesthetic." I didn't tell Sarah that I'd already spent 3 hours the night before studying the Vorax language. Not the translated version, but the raw phonetics. I wanted to understand the way Zelia's voice dipped when she was frustrated. It was professional curiosity, I told myself. A good diplomat knows his counterpart. When I entered the tactical theater, Zelia was already there. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her armor a matte black that seemed to drink the light from the room. Her skin was a calm, steady silver gray, the color of a quiet sea. "Liaison Thorne," she said, her ears twitching in a brief greeting. "You are 4 minutes late by your primary clock, 2 minutes early by mine." "I was delayed by a malfunction in the beverage distribution system," I said, taking my seat. "A tragedy of interstellar proportions." "You humans and your addiction to charred bean water," she trilled. The synapse mesh translated it with a hint of amusement. "It is a biological weakness." "Maybe," I countered, opening my files. "But it's the only thing keeping me from falling asleep while you explain the orbital mechanics of the Valoni's prime blockade for the 5th time." Her skin flickered with a faint amber light, the Vorax equivalent of a dry chuckle. "Today we discuss the Zenith Nexus perimeter. It is far more volatile." Over the next few months, our briefings became the highlight of my day. It wasn't just the work, it was the way she thought. Xylia didn't see threats as points on a map. She saw them as a symphony of possibilities. She would move icons across the holographic display with the grace of a conductor, weaving human interceptors and Vorax dreadnoughts into a seamless web of fire support. "Why do you do that?" I asked her one night, late into a double shift. We were the only 2 left in the hub. The artificial lights had been dimmed to night cycle, a deep indigo that made her skin glow with a soft, bioluminescent hum. "Do what, Calum?" "The overlapping fields. You're giving the human pilots 20% more maneuverability than your own guards. Tactically, it puts your people at a higher risk if the Skrill breach the line." She turned from the display, her violet-shadowed eyes meeting mine. "Your pilots are fragile, Calum. Their ships are built for speed, not endurance. My guards are built for the void. We endure so that you may strike. It is the harmony of our natures." "That's surprisingly poetic for someone who carries a serrated claymore to breakfast," I said, leaning back. "Poetry is just mathematics that feels something," she replied. I felt a strange, tight sensation in my chest, the kind of thing a diplomat is supposed to ignore. I looked at her, really looked at her, past the armor and the rank and the terrifying reputation. She looked tired. Even an obsidian guardian gets weary of holding up the sky. "You're doing a hell of a job, Xylia," I said softly. "The Alliance would have folded 3 months ago without you holding the line." Her ears flattened against her head, a gesture of deep surprise. Her skin flared into a soft pink, like a Terran sunrise. "You appreciate the effort? I see it, every day." She didn't say anything for a long time. She just looked at the maps. But when she spoke again, her voice was lower, lacking the sharp, military edge. "Then perhaps we should review the Sector 9 coordinates. Again." "Only if you promise to let me bring a real coffee pot tomorrow," I joked. "Agreed," she whispered. Bring your charred beans, Calum Thorne. That was the problem with the Zenith Nexus. The air was recycled, the gravity was artificial, and the politics were toxic. But the people? Sometimes the people were real. And in a galaxy of a billion stars, finding someone real is the most dangerous thing you can do. As I sat in the interrogation room now, 4 hours after the husband incident, I looked at the gray metal walls and thought about that pink sunrise on her skin. I knew what the diplomats wanted. They wanted me to say I'd manipulated her. They wanted her to say she'd been mocking me. They wanted the lie because the truth, that a human and a Vorax could actually mean something to each other, was the one thing their treaties weren't prepared for. Liaison Thorne, a voice boomed over the intercom. It was Ambassador Eris, my boss, and he sounded like he was about to burst a blood vessel. The Archon is on the line. The matriarch is screaming for blood. And you're sitting there smiling? Do you have any idea how much crap we are in? Ambassador, I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. I'm just thinking about the coffee. It's going to be a very long night. I knew then that I wasn't going to give them the lie. Zelia had called me her husband in front of the whole galaxy. The least I could do was act like I was worth the title. Thorne, Eris yelled. Tell me you're going to repudiate this. Tell me you're going to tell the press it was a glitch in the synapse mesh. I'd love to, sir, I said, and for the first time in 6 months, I felt completely awake. But the thing is, I'm pretty sure she meant it, and I think I might be okay with that. The silence on the other end of the comms was almost as satisfying as the one in the command hub. Almost. The 3 days leading up to the Great Hub silence were a masterclass in controlled chaos. If the Zenith Nexus was a nervous system, it was currently undergoing a massive, station-wide panic attack. 12 different species were descending upon us for the Pulsar Accord, each bringing their own baggage, their own environmental requirements, and their own peculiar ways of being offended. My desk was buried under 7 layers of digital manifests, and my brain felt like it had been scrubbed with industrial-grade steel wool. I was hunched over a holographic projector in the corner of the security mezzanine, trying to figure out why the delegation from the cryospires insisted on bringing 40 tons of liquid nitrogen into a pressurized lounge. They claimed it was for religious libations, but I knew a tactical hazard when I saw one. One cracked canister and half the station would turn into a very expensive ice sculpture. General Zelia appeared beside me without making a sound. Her black armor was polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the dancing blue lights of the nitrogen manifests. She looked like she had just stepped out of a Vorax recruitment poster, while I looked like a man who had been wearing the same shirt for 36 hours and had forgotten what solid food tasted like. Calum Thorne, she said, her voice a low vibration that I felt in my teeth before I heard it through the translator. You are vibrating at a frequency that suggests impending structural failure. I didn't look up from the nitrogen tanks. That is just the high of 3 liters of black coffee and the realization that the galaxy is held together by duct tape and prayers, General. Is there a reason you are haunting my cubicle, or are you just here to mock my deteriorating mental state? Zelia leaned over the projector, her long, tapered fingers tracing the security grid I had been trying to fix. Her skin was a steady professional charcoal, but I caught a flicker of pale violet at her wrists. The High Arbiter is insisting on a full ceremonial escort for the matriarch through the central plaza, she said. That creates 64 blind spots in the overhead catwalks. It is a tactical nightmare masquerading as a parade. I finally looked at her. Her ears were angled back, sharp and rigid. She was pissed. Not the kind of piss that leads to shouting, but the kind that leads to her spending the next 6 hours redesigning the entire station's defensive perimeter from scratch. So we tell him no, I said, leaning back and rubbing my neck. We tell him the safety of the matriarch outweighs the pomp and circumstance. He will not listen to a human attaché, and he considers my concerns to be overcaution, she replied, her voice dropping into that melodic trill that usually meant she was holding back a very violent impulse. He wants a show of strength. He does not understand that true strength is not seen until it is too late for the enemy to react. I watched her for a moment. Most people on this station saw Zelia as a weapon. They saw the rank, the armor, and the terrifying efficiency, but I saw the way her eyes darted to the life support readouts every time the station hummed. I saw the way she memorized the faces of every junior tech in the hub, not to intimidate them, but to know exactly who she was responsible for. You really care about this, don't you? I asked softly. Not just the mission, the people. She went still. The violet at her wrist spread slightly toward her palms. It is my purpose, she said simply. To guard. To ensure the silence of the void remains silent. Well, you are the best guard I have ever met, I said. And I used to work for the Secret Service back on Earth. They were professional, sure, but they didn't have your, let us call it, mathematical elegance. Zelia turned her head, her ears swiveling toward me. You find my methods elegant? I find the way your brain works to be a miracle of bioengineering, I joked, trying to lighten the mood. You just solved a nitrogen storage crisis by glancing at it for 10 seconds. If I tried that, I would have blown up Sector 5. She didn't laugh then. She just looked at me with that intense, unblinking Vorax stare. But the violet on her skin was deepening, turning into a rich, luminous purple that glowed against the dark fabric of her uniform. 2 hours later, we were in the command hub. This was the moment. The room was packed with officers from across the Sol Collective and the Obsidian Reach. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the nervous energy of 40 different specialists. The tactical display in the center of the room was a sprawling, three-dimensional map of the upcoming summit. Celia stood at the center, her hands moving through the holographic light like she was playing an invisible harp. Icons shifted, guard rotations adjusted. Security fields overlapped with such perfect precision that even the most paranoid Skrill assassin wouldn't find a gap the size of a needle. She had done it. She had found a way to satisfy the High Arbiter's demand for a parade while maintaining a defensive shell that was virtually impenetrable. It was a masterpiece of tactical planning. The room was silent as she finished. Even the High Arbiter looked impressed, though he would never admit it. Zelia took a step back, her posture returning to that rigid military stance, her skin fading back to a neutral gray. I was standing right beside her, caught up in the sheer brilliance of what she had just pulled off. I forgot about the 37 people watching. I forgot about the political tension and the security cameras and the fact that we were supposed to be professional counterparts. You are amazing, I said. I meant it as a quiet aside, a verbal high five between partners who had just pulled off the impossible. But Zelia didn't just nod. She turned to me, and for the first time in the 6 months I had known her, the mask shattered. Her face broke into a wide, genuine smile that showed the slight points of her teeth. And then she laughed. It was a beautiful, unrestrained sound that seemed to vibrate through the very deck plating of the station. It was the sound of someone who had been holding their breath for a lifetime and had finally found oxygen. And then she spoke. The Vorax's words were fast and melodic, a cascading series of trills that the synapse mesh around her neck struggled to process. But the mesh did its job. It did it too well. The translation didn't just go to my ear. Because she was at the central tactical console, her voice was patched into the station's primary communications array for the briefing. And you are my husband, the computer voice boomed. The word echoed through the hub, translated into 11 different languages, and broadcast across the security network. It hit the walls and bounced back, louder each time in the sudden, deafening silence. I saw the moment the realization hit her. I saw the purple glow on her skin turn into a frantic, pulsing neon as her bioluminescence went haywire. Her ears flattened so hard against her head, they almost disappeared into her hair. And then the hub went dark as she accidentally slammed her hand into the emergency override of the tactical display. In the sudden shadows with only the pulsing purple light of her panic to guide me, I realized that my life had just ended. Or perhaps it had finally begun. The interrogation room was designed to be aggressively beige. It was a human invention, the product of 200 years of psychological research that suggested neutral colors and soft lighting could break a man faster than a physical beating. I sat at the metal table, staring at a cup of water that I was pretty sure was 50% recycled sweat and 50% mineral deposits. Across from me, Ambassador Eris was pacing like a caged tiger. He had been pacing for 45 minutes. He was a man who prided himself on his ability to navigate the most complex diplomatic minefields. And I had just dropped a nuclear bomb in the middle of his peace summit. Thorn, he said, stopping and leaning his hands on the table. He looked old. The lights of the Zenith Nexus highlighted the deep lines in his forehead. We have a treaty that has taken 5 years, 3 border skirmishes, and 4,000 pages of fine print to negotiate. And in 3 seconds, you turned it into a romantic comedy. I didn't mean to, sir, I said, my voice sounding more tired than I felt. I complimented her. I didn't know the Vorax translation for amazing was a gateway drug to a marriage proposal. It isn't, Eris shouted, his face turning a shade of red that rivaled the High Arbiter's bioluminescence. The translation was accurate, Calum. That is the problem. The synapse mesh doesn't just translate words, it translates intent. It reads the neurochemical signals of the speaker. It didn't call you husband because it was a glitch. It called you husband because that is what Zelia's brain thinks you are. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. Wait, you are saying she meant it? I am saying that in the Vorax culture, a public declaration of bonding intent is a legal, biological, and religious contract, Eris hissed, sitting down heavily. They don't have a word for dating. They don't have a word for a casual fling. They have stranger, colleague, and bondmate. You just jumped from level 2 to level 10 in front of the entire high command of the Obsidian Reach. I looked at the water. My mind was racing back to every dinner we had shared, every late-night briefing where we sat just a little too close, every time she had corrected my pronunciation of her language, with a touch that lingered a second too long. So what happens now, I asked. What happens now is that the High Arbiter is currently demanding your head on a platter to appease the traditionalists, Eris said, rubbing his temples. He sees this as a human psyop. He thinks we sent a charming, coffee-drinking attaché to seduce their greatest military mind and compromise their security. That is ridiculous, I said. I can barely manage my own bank account, let alone a high-level seduction of a 4-star general. It doesn't matter if it is ridiculous. It matters if it is useful to them. The hardliners in the Vorax court hate this alliance. They think we are weak. They think our biology is messy and unpredictable, and you just gave them proof. While Eris was busy mourning his career, 4 levels below us, Zelia was facing a much colder version of the same nightmare. She stood in a room of pure obsidian, the walls absorbing every photon of light until it felt like standing in the heart of a dead star. High Arbiter Vaughn stood before her, his skin a jagged, angry crimson that didn't pulse. It burned. You have shamed the Reach, Vaughn said, his voice a series of sharp, clicking sounds that required no translation. You have allowed a scavenger, a creature of soft skin and short lives, to penetrate your mental defenses. My defenses were not penetrated, Zelia said. Her voice was steady, but her ears were pinned back in a gesture of absolute defiance. I spoke a truth that has been developing for months. Liaison Thorn has shown a level of tactical insight and personal honor that is rare even among our own kind. Honor? Vaughn laughed, a sound like grinding stones. He is a diplomat. He deals in lies and shadows. He used your own biology against you. He knew that a Vorax heart, once opened, cannot be easily closed. He knew nothing, Celia countered. He is a human. They are blind to the nuances of the resonance. He was merely being kind. And you responded with a declaration of bonding. Vaughn took a step closer, his bioluminescence flaring so bright it cast long, distorted shadows on the obsidian walls. Do you know what they are calling you in the lower decks? They are calling you the human's pet. They are saying the obsidian guardian has been tamed by a cup of charred beans and a few clever words. Zelia's skin flickered with a dangerous electric blue, the color of a Vorax preparing for combat. I am no one's pet, Arbiter, and my service to the matriarch is absolute. Then prove it, Vaughn said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. Repudiate him, publicly. State that it was a biological malfunction caused by the station's environmental systems. Tell the matriarch that the human used a chemical pheromone to confuse your senses. Zelia went very still. The blue on her skin faded, replaced by a dull, aching gray. If I say that, he will be arrested. He will be sent to a black site for questioning. He is a human, Vaughn shrugged. His life is a spark in the dark. It is irrelevant. What matters is the reach. What matters is the purity of our command. You have 48 hours to decide, General. Either you are a guardian of the Obsidian Reach, or you are a traitor who has bonded with a lesser species. Vaughn turned and walked out, the obsidian door sliding shut with a finality that felt like a coffin lid. Zelia sat down on the cold floor, her hands trembling. In the darkness of the room, her bioluminescence began to pulse slowly, a rhythmic violet that matched the beating of her heart. She thought about Caleb. She thought about the way he always made sure there was a chair waiting for her, even when the humans were all standing. She thought about the way he looked at her, not as a weapon, not as a general, but as someone who was amazing. She knew what she had to do to save her career. She knew the words that would appease Vaughn and satisfy the matriarch. She just had to lie. She just had to say that she didn't care. But as she sat there in the silence, she realized that for a Vorax, lying about the resonance wasn't just a political choice, it was a form of spiritual suicide. Back in the beige room, Eris finally stopped pacing. He looked at me with a strange expression. Not quite pity, but something close to it. "I have a shuttle leaving for the Pluto manifestation in 6 hours, Thorn," he said quietly. "I can get you on it. We can tell the Vorax you were recalled for a security breach. It will be embarrassing, but you will be alive. You will spend the next 20 years counting crates of frozen methane, but you will be safe." I looked at the water in the cup. I thought about the way Zelia had laughed. I thought about the courage it must have taken for someone as disciplined as her to let that sound out in a room full of her enemies. "If I leave, what happens to her?" I asked. Eris sighed. "She will be stripped of her rank, probably reassigned to the border wastes, or worse. The Vorax don't handle emotional compromise well. They call it the silencing. They surgically dampen the part of the brain that handles bioluminescence. She would never glow again. She would be a ghost among her own people." I felt a surge of anger so hot it made my vision blur. "You are telling me they would lobotomize her because she likes me? I am telling you that the galaxy is a cold, dark place, Caleb, and people like Zelia and you are a threat to the equilibrium." I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the metal floor. "Cancel the shuttle, sir. Thorn, don't be a hero. You are a diplomat, not a soldier." "I'm not trying to be a hero," I said, heading for the door. "But I've spent my whole life being careful. I've spent 20 years choosing the safe words and the middle ground. And for the first time in my life, I found someone who thinks I'm more than just a guy in a suit with a security clearance. I am not going to let them turn her into a ghost." "Where are you going?" Eris shouted after me. "I am going to find my wife," I said, the word feeling strange and terrifying and absolutely right on my tongue. "And then I am going to figure out how to stop a war." The guard at the door tried to stop me, but I didn't even slow down. I just looked him in the eye and said, "Move it, Lieutenant. I have a summit to save." He must have seen something in my face, and something that wasn't beige or professional, because he stepped aside. I stepped out into the corridor, the recycled air of the Zenith Nexus hitting my face. I had 48 hours. I had no weapons, no plan, and half the galaxy wanted me dead. It was, as I like to say, just another Tuesday. But as I walked toward the Vorax sector, I realized I wasn't scared. For the first time since I arrived on this station, I knew exactly what my purpose was. I wasn't there to translate words anymore. I was there to protect the only thing in the universe that actually mattered. The silence was over. It was time to start making some noise. I reached the bulkhead that separated the human sector from the Vorax territory. 2 massive guardians stood there, their armor pulsing with a warning orange. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just stood there like twin pillars of shadow. "I am Caleb Thorn," I said, my voice echoing in the empty hall. "I am here to see General Zelia." The guard on the left tilted his head, his ears sharp. "The human husband?" he asked, the translator rendering his tone as somewhere between mockery and genuine curiosity. "I am the one," I said, standing as tall as my 5'11" frame would allow, "and I am not leaving until I talk to her." The guards looked at each other. Their bioluminescence shifted, a complex series of patterns that I couldn't read. Then slowly, the bulkhead began to hiss open. The air on the other side was colder, smelling of damp earth and deep space. It was the smell of the obsidian reach. It was the smell of home. "Step through, liaison," the guard said. "But be warned. In our halls, the truth has a way of cutting deeper than any blade." "I know," I whispered, stepping into the dark. "That is exactly what I am counting on." As the door closed behind me, I realized that I had just crossed a line that no human had ever crossed before. I wasn't just a diplomat anymore. I was a participant in a story that was older than the station, older than the Alliance, and far more dangerous than any pulsar. I was a man in love. And in a galaxy built on logic and power, that made me the most unpredictable variable in the system. I followed a series of glowing violet lights down a long, winding corridor that seemed to breathe with the station's rhythm. The walls were covered in intricate carvings that told the history of the Vorax, battles fought, worlds lost, and the long, cold march toward the stars. I finally reached a large circular chamber. In the center, sitting on a raised platform, was Zelia. She wasn't wearing her armor. She was dressed in a simple, flowing robe of silver silk that shimmered in the low light. She looked smaller than she did in the hub, more fragile, but her eyes were just as sharp. "You shouldn't be here, Calum," she said, her voice a soft melody that echoed off the obsidian walls. "I know," I said, walking toward her. "But I've never been very good at following instructions." She looked at me, her skin flickering with a faint, hesitant purple. "They told me you were leaving. They told me you had been recalled to your homeworld." "They lied," I said, stopping at the edge of the platform. "I'm not going anywhere, unless you want me to." Zelia stood up, her robe rustling like dry leaves. "Do you have any idea what they will do to you? If you stay, if you acknowledge the bond, you become a target, not just for the Vorax, but for your own people. You will be a symbol of everything they fear." "I've spent my whole life being a symbol of nothing, Zelia," I said. "I'm tired of being a ghost. If I'm going to be a target, I'd rather be a target standing next to you." The violet on her skin flared into a brilliant, pulsing glow that lit up the entire room. She took a step toward me, her hand reaching out, her fingers trembling. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk everything for a creature like me? We are not the same, Calum. Our hearts beat to different rhythms. Our blood is a different color. Our lives are measured by different stars." "Because you laughed," I said, taking her hand. "Because in a room full of people who only see you as a general, you let me see you as a person. And because I think you're amazing, and I don't care if that's the wrong translation." Zelia pulled me closer, her skin warm against mine, the violet light washing over us like a tidal wave. She leaned down, her forehead resting against mine, her ears relaxing for the first time in days. "Then we shall be targets together," she whispered. And in that moment, in the heart of the obsidian reach, the two most different beings in the galaxy found the only thing that was the same. The peace summit was going to be a disaster. The High Arbiter was going to be furious. The ambassador was going to have a heart attack. But as I stood there in the dark, held by a woman who could kill me with her pinky finger and who loved me with her whole soul, I realized that for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. And that was worth any price the galaxy wanted to charge. We stood there for a long time, two sparks in the dark, waiting for the storm to break. And when it finally did, we would be ready. Together. The weight of the crown was heavy, but as long as we both held it, it wouldn't crush us. It would just make us stronger. And in the end, that was the only diplomacy that mattered. The Joint Inquiry for Cultural Integrity was held in the High Spire, a room that felt less like a courtroom and more like the inside of a massive, cold diamond. The walls were made of semi-translucent quartz that pulsed with the rhythmic, slow heartbeat of the Zenith Nexus. I sat in a chair that was clearly designed for a species with a much more robust skeletal structure than a human. Every time I moved, the seat made a sound like a dying radiator, echoing through the cavernous space. Above me, on a floating dais that seemed to mock the laws of physics, sat the heavy hitters. On the left was Ambassador Eris, looking like he had aged 10 years since breakfast. He was wearing his formal Sol Collective robes, which were essentially just a very expensive way to look like a depressed curtain. On the right was High Arbiter Vaughn, his skin a dull, menacing shade of burnt orange. In the center sat the matriarch's voice, a Vorax female whose bioluminescence was a blinding, holy white. She was the one who kept the peace, or in this case, presided over my social execution. Liaison Calum Thorne, the matriarch's voice began, her words translated into a smooth, choral English that felt like it was being sung directly into my brain. You stand before this council to clarify a linguistic anomaly that has threatened the stability of the pulsar accord. I stood up, my knees popping. The sound was amplified by the room's acoustics. I felt like a bug under a very large, very expensive magnifying glass. I am here to tell the truth, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Though I suspect truth is a variable concept in this room. Eris leaned forward, his eyes pleading with me to stick to the script we hadn't written. Calum, he said, his voice echoing. We simply need to establish that the events in the command hub were a result of a miscalibrated synapse mesh. We have a report from the technical crew stating that a solar flare from the binary pulsar caused a logic loop in the translation matrix. I looked at the High Arbiter. He wasn't even pretending to believe the lie. He was watching me with the cold, predatory patience of a shark waiting for a drop of blood. Is that right, Liaison? Vaughn hissed, the translation coming through as a serrated edge. Was it a glitch? Was the general's laughter a malfunction of her vocal cords? Was her skin's violet resonance merely a reaction to a surge in the station's power grid? I looked at the ceiling. I could see the stars through the quartz. Millions of lights, each one a sun, each one indifferent to the man standing in a suit in the middle of a diplomatic clusterfuck. I thought about Zilia. I thought about the way she looked in the dark, her skin glowing with that soft, honest purple. If I lie now, I thought, I saved the treaty. I saved my job. I go back to Earth, get a promotion, and spend the rest of my life wondering what it feels like to actually be seen. If I tell the truth, I lose everything. I'm not a scientist, Arbiter, I said, turning to Vaughn. But I've been a diplomat for 20 years. I've spent 2 decades listening to people say one thing while their eyes say another. I've lived in the gap between what is said and what is meant. The matriarch's voice tilted her head, her white light shimmering. And what was meant, Liaison? She didn't misspeak, I said, and I could hear Eris's soul leaving his body beside me, and the synapse mesh didn't glitch. It did exactly what it was designed to do. It translated a moment of genuine, unfiltered human connection into the only word the Vorax language has for it. The room erupted, not into shouting, the Vorax were too disciplined for that, but into a cacophony of bioluminescent static. The walls of the room flared with 1,000 different colors as the observers in the galleries reacted. Eris buried his face in his hands. Vaughn's orange skin turned a deep, bruised purple. Silence, the matriarch's voice commanded. The choral tone shifted into a booming bass that made the floor vibrate. She turned her gaze back to me. You realize what you are claiming? You are claiming that a human, a species that has existed in the interstellar community for less than 3 centuries, has achieved resonance with a supreme guardian of the reach. I'm claiming I told her she was amazing because she is, I said, my voice growing stronger. I'm claiming she laughed because she felt something. If your laws can't handle a little bit of joy, then maybe your laws are the problem, not us. High Arbiter Vaughn stood up, his hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial blade. This is an insult to the Obsidian Reach. He is a ground pounder, a soft-bellied diplomat who has spent his life hiding behind words. To suggest he could bond with a warrior of Zilia's caliber is biological blasphemy. Then explain the data, a new voice said. A holographic window opened in the center of the room. A Vorax female in the silver robes of a scientist stepped into the light. She looked nervous, her skin flickering in rapid pale yellows. I am researcher Elara, she said. I was monitoring the biorhythms of the hub during the incident. We were running a routine stress test of the synapse mesh. She swiped her hand and 2 graphs appeared in the air. One was a jagged line of blue, my brain waves. The other was a series of rhythmic violet pulses, Zilia's bioluminescence. As the recording played, the 2 lines began to move together. At the exact moment I said the word amazing, the 2 graphs locked. They didn't just align, they became a single unified frequency. This is not a glitch, Alara whispered, her voice carrying through the silent hall. This is the resonance. At that moment, their neurochemical signatures were 99% identical. In our culture, we call this the joining. It has not been recorded between a vorax and a non-resonant species in over 10,000 years. The silence that followed was heavier than the one in the hub. This wasn't just a diplomatic incident anymore. This was a paradigm shift. Eris looked up from his hands, his eyes wide. 99%? The vorax don't lie with their skin, Ambassador, Alara said. General Zilia didn't choose the word husband. Her body did. Vaughn looked like he was about to explode. He turned to the matriarch's voice. It doesn't matter. The law is clear. A guardian who bonds with a non-resident is compromised. She must be silenced. The word hit me like a physical blow. I didn't know the specifics of the silencing, but the way Zilia had described it, the loss of her glow, the loss of her soul, made my stomach turn. Wait, I shouted. You can't do that. You're talking about a human rights violation. Or, well, Vorax rights. Whatever it is, it's crap. You have no standing here, liaison, Vaughn spat. This is internal Vorax law. Actually, Aris said, standing up and smoothing his robes. His diplomat brain was finally back online. According to the Pulsar Accord, Section 42, Paragraph 9, any legal matter involving a member of the Soul Collective and a member of the Obsidian Reach must be adjudicated by a joint council. If Liaison Thorn is indeed the husband in this scenario, he has legal standing as a family member under Vorax traditional code. Eris looked at me and winked. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. The matriarch's voice shimmered. The ambassador is correct. Under the ancient codes, a bonded mate has the right to challenge a sentence of silencing. Vaughn's orange skin went dark. You would allow this meatbag to challenge the High Arbiter? The code is the code, the voice said. Calum Thorne, do you wish to invoke the right of the bond? I had no idea what that meant. I looked at Eris. He gave a tiny, frantic nod. I do, I said, my heart pounding at 2,300 hours speed. Then you have 48 hours, the voice announced. At the end of that time, you and General Zilia must prove your resonance before the matriarch herself. If you succeed, the bond is recognized, and the silencing is vacated. If we fail, I asked. Zilia will be silenced, and you will be executed for spiritual fraud, the voice said, her choral tone as cold as the void. The room went dark. The holographic displays vanished. I was left standing in the quartz chamber, alone with Eris. Well, Aris said, exhaling a long, shaky breath. That went better than expected. Better? I yelled. I'm going to be executed. Yeah, but we bought 2 days, Eris said, patting me on the shoulder. Now, if I were you, I'd go find your wife. You two have a lot of practicing to do. And Calum, try not to make any more jokes. My heart can't take it. I walked out of the high spire, my mind a blur. I had 48 hours to figure out how to be a husband to a 7-foot-tall alien general with bioluminescent skin. I've had some bad Tuesdays, but this one was definitely in the top 5. The Obsidian Garden was located in the lowest ring of the Zenith Nexus, a place where the station's artificial sun didn't reach. It was a biodome filled with flora from Zilia's homeworld, trees that looked like frozen lightning, flowers that breathed out a soft, phosphorescent mist, and moss that hummed when you walked on it. It was the only place on the station where a Vorax could truly feel the resonance of their own world. I found Zilia standing by a pool of liquid mercury, her reflection shimmering in the silver surface. She wasn't in her armor. She wore a simple dark tunic that allowed her skin to glow freely. In the dim light of the garden, she was a masterpiece of violet and indigo. You came, she said, her voice a low trill that blended with the humming moss. I'm a diplomat, Zilia, I said, stepping onto the soft ground. We're like bad pennies, we always turn up. She turned to face me. Her ears were tilted down, a sign of deep sorrow. I heard about the trial. I heard about the resonance scan. Yeah, well, it turns out my brain is just as obsessed with you as yours is with me, I joked, though it felt thin. 99% Zilia. The scientists are baffled. The politicians are terrified. And I'm just trying to figure out if this means I have to start liking your music. She didn't smile. She walked toward me, her bioluminescence casting long purple shadows across the garden. Do you know what the silencing is, Caleb? I know it's bad, I said. It is the death of the self, she whispered. They use a neural shifter to disconnect the amygdala from the skin's light cells. I would still be Zilia. I would still remember how to fight, how to lead, how to breathe. But I would be dark. I would never feel the resonance of another living being again. I would be a stone in a world of light. I reached out, my hand hovering near hers. I didn't want to touch her, not because I was afraid, but because she looked so fragile in that moment. I won't let them do that, I said. I invoked the right of the bond. Celia's ears snapped up. You what? Caleb, that is madness. The right of the bond requires us to pass the test of the twin hearts. If we fail, they will kill you. I know, I said, but I've spent my whole life being safe, Zilia. I've spent 40 years being the guy who makes the coffee and writes the reports. I've been a ghost in my own life, but when I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally standing in the sun. She looked at me, her skin pulsing with a rapid, frantic violet. You are a strange creature, Caleb Thorne. You use humor to hide your heart, yet you offer your life for a woman you barely know. I know you, I said, finally closing the gap and taking her hand. I know you're the only person on this station who actually listens when I talk. I know you're the only one who sees the world in mathematics and poetry at the same time. I know you're amazing. She pulled me closer, her height making me feel small but protected. Her skin was warm, smelling of ozone and lavender. Kylum, she whispered, to pass the test we must be completely vulnerable. No shields, no humor, no lies. We must share the resonance. I can do that, I said, though I wasn't sure if I could. Human vulnerability was a messy, terrifying thing. We spent our lives building walls, of sarcasm, of career, of ego. To tear them down was like skinning yourself alive. Show me, she said. She took my other hand and led me to the center of the garden, where a massive tree of white crystal stood. This is the heart tree, she explained. It amplifies the resonance. Sit with me. We sat on the humming moss, facing each other. Zelia closed her eyes, her skin settling into a deep, rhythmic indigo. Now, Caleb, she said, don't think about the words. Don't think about the politics. Think about the feeling. Think about the moment in the hub. I closed my eyes. I tried to push away the image of Ambassador Eris's face. I tried to forget about the execution order and the 48-hour deadline. I focused on the sound of Zilia's breathing. It was steady, constant, a rhythm I had learned to recognize over 6 months of shared silence. I thought about the first time I saw her. I thought she was a monster, a killing machine designed by a cruel god. And then I saw her correct a junior tech's mistake without embarrassing him. I saw her look at the stars with a longing that I recognized from my own childhood in the suburbs of Ohio. I felt a warmth starting in my chest. It wasn't the heat of the station's recycled air. It was something else, a golden thread of light that seemed to stretch from my heart to hers. The moss beneath us began to glow brighter. The heart tree pulsed with a soft, white light that matched our heartbeats. I saw her, I thought. I didn't just see the general. I saw the girl who wanted to be a musician. I saw the woman who felt the weight of every life she protected. Suddenly, I wasn't just in my own head. I felt a surge of cold, sharp steel, Zilia's discipline, and then beneath it, a well of loneliness so deep it made me gasp. She had been alone for 75 years, surrounded by soldiers and courtiers, but fundamentally, biologically alone. And then she saw me. I felt her perception of me, the strange, loud human who made bad jokes and smelled like burnt beans. She saw my fear, my fatigue, and my desperate need to be useful, but she also saw my kindness. She saw the way I looked at the world with wonder, despite everything I had seen. The resonance was a flood. It was 1,000 memories and 1,000,000 feelings crashing into each other. I saw a Vorex sunset. I felt the cold bite of a plasma burn. I heard the laughter of a species I would never fully understand. And through it all, there was a single, clear note, a harmony. She loved me, not because of a treaty, not because of a pheromone. She loved me because I was the only thing in her universe that wasn't predictable, I was the chaos she had been searching for. I opened my eyes. The entire garden was glowing a brilliant, blinding violet. Zilia was looking at me, her face wet with tears. Vorax tears which shimmered like liquid silver. "You felt it," she whispered. "I felt it," I said, my voice thick. It's a lot, Zilia." "It is the truth," she said, reaching out to wipe a silver tear from her cheek. "And it is the most dangerous thing we have ever done." We sat there in the glowing garden for a long time, held in the amber of our shared soul. I realized then that the cost of not learning this lesson, of staying safe, of staying silent, was far higher than the cost of a death sentence. To live without this, without being truly known, was the real silencing. But our moment of peace was shattered by a sharp electronic chirp from my wrist. "Thorn!" Eris's voice shouted through the comms. "Get out of there! Now!" "What's wrong?" I asked, scrambling to my feet. "The hardliners," Eris hissed. "They aren't waiting for the 48 hours. Vaughn has convinced the Security Council that your resonance is a form of biological warfare. They've sent a strike team to the garden to neutralize the threat." I looked at Celia. Her skin went from violet to a sharp electric blue in a heartbeat. Her ears tilted forward. The general was back. "Neutralize the threat?" I asked. "You mean they're going to kill us?" "They aren't coming to arrest you, Calum," Eris said, his voice fading into static. "Bug out. Now." A heavy thud echoed through the biodome. The massive obsidian doors at the entrance were being forced. Xylia reached into the mercury pool and pulled out a hidden compartment. She drew a pulse blade that glowed with a lethal, white light. "Stay behind me, husband," she said, her voice dropping into that predatory trill. I looked at her, then at the doors. I didn't have a weapon, I didn't have armor, but I had the resonance. I could feel her heartbeat, her intent, her anger. "I'm not staying behind you," I said, picking up a heavy crystalline branch that had fallen from the heart tree. "If we're doing this, we're doing it together." The doors blew inward with a roar of depressurizing air. 6 Vorax guardians in full combat gear stormed into the garden, their pulse rifles leveled at us. In the back, High Arbiter Vaughn walked through the smoke, his skin a jagged, murderous red. "General Zilia," Vaughn said, his voice carrying over the humming moss. "You have been found guilty of treason. Your execution is authorized. And as for the human..." Vaughn looked at me, his eyes burning with hatred. "I will enjoy watching your light go out." Zilia took a step forward, the pulse blade humming in her hand. "You will find, Arbiter, that a heart in resonance is not so easily silenced." I stood beside her, my crystalline branch held tight. My hands were shaking, and my heart was screaming for me to run, but for the first time in 40 years, I wasn't afraid. We were 2 souls in a single rhythm, and we were about to show the obsidian reach exactly what happens when you try to put out the sun. "Let's move," I whispered. Zilia gave a short, sharp trill, the Vorax signal for the attack. And then, the Garden of Light turned into a Garden of War. The first Guardian fired a bolt of white energy. Zilia moved with a speed that defied human sight, her blade parrying the bolt into a nearby tree. She was a blur of black and blue, a dance of destruction that was as beautiful as it was terrifying. I didn't try to be a soldier. I didn't try to be a hero. I just moved where the resonance told me to move. When a Guardian aimed at my head, I felt the intent before the trigger was pulled, and I ducked, the bolt sizzling over my shoulder. I swung the crystal branch at the legs of a second Guardian, the heavy wood connecting with a satisfying crunch of armor. He went down, and Zilia was there in a heartbeat, her blade finding the gap in his neck plating. "One down," I panted, my lungs burning in the thin air. Vaughn screamed a command in his native tongue. The remaining Guardians fanned out, trying to flank us. The garden was a chaos of white light and purple shadows, but we weren't 2 individuals anymore. We were a system. Every time Xylia moved left, I moved right to cover her blind spot. Every time I stumbled, her hand was there to steady me. It wasn't tactical training, it was the resonance. We were thinking with one brain. We fought our way toward the emergency exit, a narrow tunnel that led into the station's maintenance shafts. If we could get into the guts of the Nexus, we had a chance. Vaughn saw what we were doing. He leveled his own pulse pistol and fired a volley of shots. One hit the heart tree, shattering the white crystal into 1,000 stinging shards. The resonance flickered. A wave of pain from the tree's destruction washed over us, making me fall to my knees. "Calum!" Zelia cried, reaching for me. "Go!" I shouted, pointing to the tunnel. "If they get you, it's over." She didn't leave. She stood over me, her blades spinning in a defensive circle that blocked a hail of energy fire. She was taking hits. I could feel the dull ache of the bolts against her armor, the heat searing her skin. But she didn't move. She was the guardian, and I was her bondmate. And in that moment, in the middle of a firefight in a dying garden, the lesson finally hit home. Love wasn't about the good times. It wasn't about the laughter or the compliments. Love was the courage to stand in the fire for someone else, knowing that you might burn to ash. I forced myself up, grabbing Zelia's arm. "Now!" We dived into the maintenance tunnel just as a massive explosion rocked the garden. The ceiling collapsed, sealing the entrance behind us and plunging us into total darkness. The only thing I could see was Zelia's skin. She was glowing a faint, exhausted violet. "Are you hurt?" she whispered, her voice ragged. "I'm fine," I said, leaning against the cold metal of the tunnel wall. "Just give me a minute to remember how to breathe." She slumped against me, her head resting on my shoulder. "We are fugitives, Calum. We have no rank, no protection. We are alone in the dark." "No," I said, wrapping my arm around her. "We are exactly where we need to be." I looked down the long, dark tunnel. We had 36 hours left until the summit. 36 hours to find the matriarch, stop the hardliners, and prove to the galaxy that two different rhythms can make a beautiful song. "I hope you're ready, Zelia," I said, "because I'm out of coffee, and I'm starting to get really cranky." She laughed then, a soft, tired sound that echoed through the dark. "I am ready, husband," she said. We started walking, two sparks in the deep, dark heart of the machine. The galaxy was waiting. The maintenance shafts of the Zenith Nexus were a labyrinth of cold copper and weeping steam. It was a world that the high-level diplomats and the shimmering Vorax guardians never saw. A place where the station's vital fluids hissed through pipes as thick as ancient redwoods. The air here was heavy with the smell of scorched oil and the metallic tang of ionizing radiation. Every few seconds, the massive gravitational stabilizers hummed with a vibration that made my teeth ache. Zelia led the way, her violet glow the only thing keeping us from walking into a vertical drop-off or a high-voltage conduit. She moved with a silent, fluid grace that even her injuries couldn't dampen. I, on the other hand, was a walking disaster. My suit was torn, my knuckles were bleeding, and I was pretty sure I'd cracked a rib when that crystalline tree exploded. Every breath felt like someone was poking a hot needle into my side. "Stay frosty, Calum," Zelia whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of a nearby coolant pump. "The resonance tells me they are still behind us, but they are hesitant. They do not know these lower levels as I do." I leaned against a vibrating bulkhead, trying to catch my breath. "They're hesitant because this place is a death trap, Zelia. I'm pretty sure I just saw a three-legged rodent the size of a golden retriever." "That was likely a maintenance drone," she replied, though her ears flickered with a hint of amusement, "or a very lost pet. Come, we are approaching the Subsector Zero. It is the only way to reach the Matriarch's sanctum without being ghosted by the automated turret arrays in the main elevators." We scrambled over a pile of rusted scrap metal and into a wider chamber. The ceiling was lost in shadows, but the walls were lined with rows of small, dark alcoves. As we passed, I realized with a jolt of horror that the alcoves weren't empty. Figures sat within them, Vorax, hundreds of them, their skin a dull, lifeless gray. They didn't move, they didn't look up. They sat in a state of catatonic stillness that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "The Echoes," Zelia said, her skin dimming to a mournful indigo. "These are the ones who were silenced. Warriors who failed their oaths, scholars who sought forbidden resonance, lovers who chose poorly. They are not dead, but their light is gone. They are the living ghosts of the Reach." I stopped in front of one of them. It was a female, perhaps 50 or 60 years old in Vorax terms. Her face was a mask of absolute apathy. I reached out, my fingers hovering an inch from her shoulder. I felt Nothing. Not the humming resonance of Zelia, not the sharp anger of the Guardians. Just a void, a hollow space where a soul should be. This is what Vaughn wants for you, I said, a cold anger settling in my gut. Yes, Zelia replied, her hand finding mine. Her grip was tight, almost painful. And it is what he will get if we fail. The Vorax cannot fathom a life without the light. To be dark is to be non-existent. We are discarded like broken tools. One of the echoes stirred. He was an old warrior, his ears torn and his skin scarred by 1,000 battles. He slowly raised his head, his eyes meeting mine. For a split second, I saw a flicker of something. Not light, but a memory of it. He looked at our joined hands, then at Zelia's brilliant violet skin. "Run!" the old man wheezed, the word coming through the synapse mesh as a cracked, broken sound. "Run, Guardian, before the dark takes you both." Zelia bowed her head to him. "We do not run to hide, Elder. We run to the light." We left the chamber of the echoes behind, the silence of the discarded following us like a shroud. The further we went, the more I realized that the humanistic theme of our struggle wasn't just about us. It was about an entire species that had traded its empathy for a rigid mathematical perfection. They had turned their own people into furniture the moment they stopped being efficient. "Is there any way to bring them back?" I asked as we climbed a vertical ladder toward the upper rings. Zelia didn't answer for a long time. "The medical texts say no," she finally said. "Once the neural shifter severs the connection, the light cells die. But the legends, they speak of the primal resonance, a connection so strong it can restart the heart of a star. You think we have that?" "I think we have 48 hours to find out," she said, her voice turning sharp. "We are here." She pushed open a heavy grate, and we spilled out into a corridor that was the exact opposite of the maintenance shafts. It was white, pristine, and smelled of expensive incense and filtered oxygen. We were in the high sanctum, the private residence of the matriarch. There were no guards here. The Varax believed that no one could reach this level without authorization. The arrogance of the powerful was the same in every corner of the galaxy. Zelia moved toward a set of massive gold-leaf doors at the end of the hall. "This is it, Calum. The matriarch is behind these doors. If we can reach her before Vaughn's strike team catches up, we have a chance. She is old and her resonance is ancient, but she is fair." "Wait," I said, grabbing her arm. "I need to know something. If she says no, if she tells us that the law is absolute, what do we do?" Zelia looked at me, her violet eyes reflecting the gold of the doors. Her skin flared into a sudden, fierce pink, the color of absolute devotion. "Then we go to the echoes together, Kylam. I would rather be dark with you than shimmer in a world without you." I nodded, my throat tight. "Copy that, General. Let's go pay our respects." She pushed the doors open. The room beyond was a vast, circular amphitheater of light. In the center, sitting on a throne of living coral that pulsed with a soft, white radiance, was the matriarch. She was ancient, her skin so pale it was almost transparent, her bioluminescence a slow, rhythmic silver that felt like the tide. "General Zelia," the matriarch said, her voice not coming from her mouth but appearing directly in my mind, "and the human who has caused such a stir in my court. You have come a long way through the shadows to find me." "We have, matriarch," Zelia said, dropping to one knee. "I come to claim the right of the bond." The matriarch's silver light rippled. "The right is a dangerous path, child. It requires more than just affection. It requires a total fusion of the self. Are you prepared to lose who you are to become who you might be together?" I stepped forward, standing beside Zelia. "I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to keep her from being silenced, matriarch. My life for hers. That's the deal." The matriarch turned her gaze to me. "Your life is a short thing, human. A flash of lightning in a summer storm. Why would you throw it away for a guardian of the reach?" "Because she makes the stars look dull," I said. And for once, I wasn't joking. Because I spent 40 years being a shadow, and she gave me a reason to be a light. The matriarch began to hum, a low melodic sound that seemed to fill every atom of the room. It was the trial of souls. I felt the floor beneath me vanish. I felt my skin peel away, my memories spilling out into the silver light. I saw my childhood, my failures, my lonely nights at the embassy. And then I felt Zelia. It was like stepping into a sun. Her strength, her fear, her love for me, it was all there, a roaring ocean of indigo and violet. But then the silver light turned a jagged, angry red. The doors to the sanctum were blown off their hinges. High Arbiter Vaughn stormed into the room, followed by a dozen guardians. His skin was a murderous crimson, his pulse blade drawn and humming. "Stop this madness," Vaughn shouted, his voice a series of harsh, distorted clicks. "Matriarch, the human is using a neural parasite to mimic the resonance. He is an assassin." The matriarch stopped humming, the silver light fading. "Vaughn, you disrupt the sacred trial. I disrupt a treason." Vaughn pointed his blade at me. "Guard! Execute the human!" The guardians moved forward, their rifles leveled. Zelia stood up, her own blade flashing white. "Back off!" she roared, her voice a predatory trill. It was the climax of everything. The humanistic theme, the courage to be vulnerable, was about to be tested in the most literal way possible. The guardians fired. Zelia parried the bolts, her body a shield for mine. But there were too many of them. A bolt caught her in the shoulder, and she stumbled, her skin flickering to a painful dim gray. "No!" I screamed. "I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have armor. But I had the resonance." I felt Zelia's pain, her flickering light, and her desperate need to protect me. I realized then that the only way to stop this wasn't to fight. It was to open up. I walked past Zelia, directly into the line of fire. "Calum, get back!" she cried. I ignored her. I looked at the guardians, at the matriarch, at Vaughn. I closed my eyes and reached out, not with my hands, but with my mind. I didn't try to hide my fear. I didn't try to be a diplomat. I just let everything I felt for Zelia, every ounce of love, gratitude, and desperate hope, pour out of me like a flood. I wasn't a Vorax. I didn't have light cells. But in that moment, something happened that defied every law of alien biology. My heart, the simple human muscle in my chest, hit a frequency that resonated with the station's quartz walls. A shockwave of pure golden energy erupted from me. It wasn't a weapon, it was a feeling. The guardians stopped in their tracks, their rifles lowered. Their skin, which had been a uniform, military gray, began to flicker with a confused, beautiful array of colors, pinks, blues, and violets they hadn't felt in years. Vaughn stumbled back, shielding his eyes. "What is this? What are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth," I said, my voice echoing through the sanctum. "And the truth is that we are more than just rank and species. We are the connection." The matriarch stood up from her throne, her silver light expanding until it filled the entire chamber. She looked at me, her ancient eyes wide with wonder. "The primal resonance," she whispered, "from a human." She turned to Vaughn, her light turning a sharp, blinding white. "High Arbiter, your heart is dark. You see only the order of the machine, not the music of the stars. You are the one who is compromised." "Guardians!" Vaughn screamed, his voice cracking. "Kill them!" But the guardians didn't move. They were looking at each other, their skin glowing with a newfound warmth. The resonance had reached them. The lie of their cold perfection had been shattered by a single, honest human heart. "Arrest him," the matriarch commanded. The guardians turned on Vaughn. He tried to fight, his pulse blade swinging wildly, but they swarmed him, their own bioluminescence drowning out his angry red. Celia collapsed against me, her skin a warm, steady purple. "We did it," she whispered. "We did it," I said, holding her tight as the silver light of the matriarch washed over us. But as I looked at the matriarch, I saw a flicker of sadness in her eyes. The trial was over, the battle was won, but the cost was only beginning to be calculated. The galaxy would never be the same. The alliance was no longer a treaty between nations. It was a bond between souls. And for a man who just wanted a good cup of coffee, that was a lot of responsibility. The fallout of the High Sanctum incident was like a supernova in a library. Within 6 hours, every major news outlet in the Sol Collective and the Obsidian Reach was broadcasting the same grainy footage of a human diplomat erupting with golden energy while a Vorax general stood at his side. The Pulsar Accord wasn't just signed, it was rewritten in the fires of a biological miracle. I woke up in a medical bay that looked like it belonged on a luxury cruise ship. The walls were soft, the lighting was a gentle amber, and the air smelled like actual jasmine instead of recycled sweat. My ribs were wrapped in a high-tech biofoam that made the pain feel like a distant memory. "Morning, sunshine," a voice said. I turned my head. Ambassador Aris was sitting in a chair by the bed, reading a digital tablet. He looked like he'd finally slept for 12 hours, but his expression was still one of stunned disbelief. "How long was I out?" I asked, my voice raspy. 24 hours, Aris said, setting the tablet down. "You've missed quite a bit. Vaughn is in a high-security containment cell, awaiting trial for attempted regicide. The matriarch has officially recognized your bond, and the Soul Collective is currently trying to decide whether to give you a medal or a psychological evaluation." "I'll take the medal if it comes with a pension," I joked, though my heart wasn't in it. "Where's Zelia?" "She's with the matriarch," Aris said, his voice softening. "They're discussing the future of the Obsidian Guard. Turns out your little golden outburst has triggered a bit of a cultural revolution. Half the Vorax military is currently experiencing unauthorized feelings. They're calling it the Thorn Effect." "The Thorn Effect?" I groaned, sinking back into the pillows. "That sounds like a skin condition. It's a miracle, Calum. You did the impossible. You found a way to bridge the gap between two species that have nothing in common." I closed my eyes. "We have everything in common, sir. We're all just trying not to be alone in the dark." The door to the medical bay slid open, and Zelia walked in. She was wearing her full general's armor, but the helmet was off, and her skin was glowing with a vibrant, pulsing violet that made the room feel warm. Her ears were tilted forward in that expression of absolute focus I love so much. "Ambassador," she said, her voice a low melodic trill. "General," Aris replied, standing up, "I believe I have some very important papers to sign in Sector 4. I'll leave you two to discuss the diplomatic implications." Aris winked at me. He was getting way too comfortable with that, and slipped out of the room. Zelia walked to the side of the bed and looked down at me. "You look terrible, Calum Thorne." "I just saved the galaxy, Zelia. I'm allowed to have messy hair." She reached out and ran a finger along my jawline. Her skin felt electric, a hum of pure, unadulterated affection that made my own heart skip a beat. "The matriarch has made her decision," she said, "and the bond is sacred. But the council is still afraid. They see us as a threat to the old ways. They want us to serve as the first interstellar liaisons of the heart. We are to be the ambassadors for the new alliance." "Sounds like a lot of meetings," I said, taking her hand, "and even more paperwork." "It means we will be together," she whispered, "everywhere. On Earth, on the Reach, on the stations in between. We will be the proof that the resonance is real." I pulled her closer, my arm wrapping around her waist. "It's going to be a nightmare, Zelia. Every hardliner in the galaxy is going to be watching us, waiting for us to mess up. We're going to be a target for the rest of our lives." She leaned down, her forehead resting against mine. The silver light of her eyes was the only thing I could see. "Then let them watch," she said. "Let them see what it looks like when two sparks refuse to go out." I smiled, the last of my diplomatic defenses finally crumbling. "I guess I really am the husband of a general." "And I am the wife of a man who makes terrible jokes and smells like charred beans," she replied, her skin flaring into a brilliant, happy pink. We sat there in the quiet of the medical bay, two beings from different worlds, different stars, and different histories. The galaxy was still a cold, dangerous place. There were wars to be stopped, treaties to be signed, and a billion souls who were still sitting in the dark, waiting for a light to find them. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about the future. I wasn't worried about the silence or the shadows or the cost of being honest. I had the resonance, I had the light, and most importantly, I had her. "Just one thing," I said as she leaned in for a kiss. "Yes, husband. I'm still not liking that clicking music of yours. It sounds like a haunted typewriter." Zelia laughed, a sound that filled the room and echoed through the station, a sound that carried all the way to the echoes in the dark, reminding them that even in the silence, there is always a song waiting to be sung. "We will find a middle ground," she said. Perhaps jazz. Jazz, I said, closing my eyes. I can work with jazz. And as the suns of the binary pulsar rose over the zenith nexus, casting a golden light over the station's obsidian towers, I realized that the greatest diplomacy isn't done with words or treaties or logic. It's done with the heart. And our heart was just getting started. The Great Hall of Unity on the zenith nexus was never intended to be comfortable. It was designed to be imposing, a soaring cathedral of crystalline glass and obsidian arches that made every sentient being feel exactly as small as the galactic bureaucracy intended. But today, the atmosphere was different. The air didn't just smell like ozone and recycled oxygen. It felt charged, as if the very atoms of the station were still vibrating from the golden shockwave I had unleashed in the matriarch's sanctum. I stood at the back of the hall, leaning against a pillar that felt more like frozen starlight than stone. My ribs were still screaming at me every time I took a deep breath, but the biofoam was doing its job, keeping the pain at a dull roar. I watched as the delegates from 12 different systems filed into their seats. They weren't whispering like they usually did. They were looking at each other, really looking. A Skrill officer was tentatively touching the shoulder of a human technician. Two binary union representatives were flashing lights at a frequency that looked suspiciously like a rhythmic dance. The Thorn effect was in full swing, and it was a mess. "Liaison Thorn," a voice said from my right. I didn't have to turn to know it was Lieutenant Sarah Miller. She was wearing her formal dress blues, looking like she'd spent 3 hours with a lint roller. She had a look on her face that was equal parts awe and, "I told you so." "Lieutenant," I said, managing a weak grin, "you look like you're ready for a parade or a funeral." "Which one are we attending?" Sarah snorted, leaning against the pillar next to me. "The brass is calling it a transcendent diplomatic breakthrough. I'm calling it the biggest clusterfuck in the history of the Sol Collective. Do you have any idea how many regulations you broke, Calum?" "I've lost count, Sarah. I'm pretty sure I'm currently guilty of treason, spiritual fraud, and possibly several counts of breaking the laws of physics." She looked at me, her eyes softening. "My brother back on Earth sent me a message this morning. He saw the footage. He said it was the first time in 20 years he didn't feel like the Vorax were monsters. He said they looked like us." "That's the problem," I whispered. "Everyone thinks we're the same now. We're not. Celia still sees the world in vectors and combat patterns. I still can't look at her skin without my brain trying to short circuit. We're still two different species, Sarah. We're just not alone anymore." The sound of 3 rhythmic chimes echoed through the hall, signaling the start of the final session. At the front of the room, on a dais that glowed with a soft, silver light, sat the matriarch and Ambassador Eris. Between them was a single transparent tablet, the pulsar accord. I watched as Xylia walked onto the stage. She was in her full ceremonial armor, black and silver, her skin a steady, majestic violet. She didn't look like a fugitive anymore. She looked like a queen. As she took her place behind the matriarch, her ears swiveled toward the back of the room. She found me instantly. The resonance was a quiet hum in my chest, a warm vibration that told me she was nervous, proud, and relieved all at the same time. Ambassador Eris stood up, smoothing his robes. For the first time in my career, I saw him speak without a script. He didn't look at his notes. He looked at the audience. "We came to the Zenith Nexus to talk about borders," Eris began, his voice carrying through the hall without the need for a microphone. "We came to talk about mining rights, trade routes, and military buffer zones. We spent 5 years arguing about how far apart we should stay." He paused, glancing at the matriarch. "But over the last 48 hours, we have been forced to confront a reality that no treaty could ever capture. We have seen that the gap between us is not a void to be feared, but a bridge to be built. We have seen that vulnerability is not a weakness, but the ultimate expression of strength." High Arbiter Vaughn was notably absent, currently residing in a high-security ward. In his place stood a younger Vorax officer, his skin a hesitant, swirling pink. The old guard hadn't been defeated, they had been outshone. The matriarch rose, her silver light expanding, until it touched every being in the first 10 rows. "The Pulsar Accord is no longer a document of separation," she trilled. "It is a covenant of resonance. We recognize the bond between Calum Thorne and General Xylia, not as an anomaly, but as a roadmap. I felt a lump in my throat. This was the moment I was supposed to be cynical. I was supposed to be making a joke about how long the signature ceremony was taking, but I couldn't. I was busy thinking about the echoes, those gray, lifeless figures in the maintenance shafts. I wondered if they were feeling this. I wondered if the light was finding them too. Secondary characters, the people I'd worked with for 6 months, were shifting in their seats. A human logistics officer next to a Varax archivist reached out and took a data pad from her, their hands brushing for a second. Neither of them pulled away. The theme was moving from the heart of our struggle to the heart of the station. It was the realization that we spend so much time protecting ourselves behind armor, behind ranks, behind cultural barriers, that we forget why we're even standing here. We protect ourselves until there's nothing left to protect but a hollow shell. The matriarch pressed her hand to the tablet. Then Aris pressed his. The pulsar accord was signed. The hall didn't erupt in cheers. It erupted in light. Every Vorax in the room flared into a brilliant, pulsing array of colors, a symphony of joy, relief, and hope. The humans, unable to glow, did the only thing they knew how to do. They stood up and clapped. The sound was thunderous. It was messy, loud, and entirely human. Zilia looked at me from the stage, her violet skin glowing so bright it was almost white. She gave a tiny, sharp nod. The general's salute. I smiled back, leaning against my pillar. We'd done it. We'd survived the summit. We'd survived the fire. But as I watched the diplomats start to mingle, I realized that the real work was just beginning. You can sign a treaty in a day, but it takes a lifetime to learn how to live with someone who sees the universe differently than you do. I started walking toward the stage, my boots clicking on the obsidian floor. I wasn't a diplomat anymore. I wasn't a hero. I was just a man going to see his wife. I passed Sarah Miller, who gave me a sharp military salute. "Good luck, Calum," she whispered. "You're going to need it." "I'm counting on it, Sarah," I said. As I reached the stairs to the dais, Aris caught my eye. He looked exhausted but happy. "Thorn," he said as I passed him. "The matriarch wants to talk to you about the new embassy on the Reach. Apparently they want you to design the coffee lounge." I laughed, a real unrestrained sound. "I think I can handle that, sir, as long as they don't try to optimize the filters." I stepped onto the stage and walked toward Zilia. The crowds, the cameras, the matriarch, they all faded away. There was only her. "You are late, Calum Thorn," she whispered, her ears twitching with amusement. "I was busy enjoying the silence," I said, taking her hands. "It's the last time we're going to have it for a while." "Then let us make the most of the noise," she replied. We stood there at the center of the galaxy, two beings who had broken every rule in the book, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for the exit. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The shadows were gone, the light was here, and it was beautiful. The first 3 months after the signing of the accord were a blur of jump gates, state dinners, and increasingly bizarre questions from the interstellar press. I had been interviewed by journalists who communicated through scent, journalists who were sentient swarms of nanites, and one guy from a tabloid on Mars who wanted to know if Vorax's skin tasted like blueberries. For the record, it doesn't. It tastes like ozone in the future. Zilia and I were currently on a diplomatic transport heading toward the Sol system. It was our first official visit to Earth as the joint liaisons of the heart, a title I still couldn't say with a straight face, but one that came with a surprisingly high security clearance and a very comfortable stateroom. Zilia was sitting by the observation port, watching the stars stretch into long, white lines as we traveled at warp speed. She was wearing a human-style dress made of Vorax silk, a deep, midnight blue that complemented the steady violet of her skin. She looked peaceful. "Calum," she said, without turning around. "I am reading a report from the Zenith Nexus. The High Arbiter's trial has concluded." I sat down next to her, offering her a cup of actual, high-quality Earth coffee. "And he has been sentenced to the border wastes," she said, her ears tilting back. "But he was not silenced. The matriarch has abolished the practice. She said that a darkness forced upon a soul is a crime against the resonance." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. That's a big deal, Zilia." "It is everything," she whispered, taking a sip of the coffee and making a face. This still tastes like burnt dirt, husband. It's an acquired taste, wife, I replied, grinning. I stood up and walked to the small holographic console in our room. I had a task to do, one that I'd been putting off since we left the Nexus. I had to record my final report for the Sol Collective, but I didn't want to write a report. I wanted to leave a record. I cleared my throat, the red light of the recorder blinking on. This is Liaison Calum Thorne, I began. Final entry for the Zenith Nexus assignment. Usually these reports are filled with numbers. How many tons of ore were traded? How many light years of territory were secured? How many credits were spent on recycled air? But those numbers don't tell the story. I looked at Celia. She was watching me now, her silver eyes reflecting the light of the recorder. For 20 years, I thought my job was to manage the distance between us, I said, my voice steady. I thought diplomacy was the art of keeping everyone in their own lane so nobody got hurt. I thought vulnerability was a liability. I was wrong. I spent 2 decades being a ghost because I was afraid of what would happen if someone actually saw me. If they saw my failures, my loneliness, my bad jokes. I took a breath, the biofoam on my ribs finally gone. The skin healed, but the memory of the pain still there. I learned that the only way to truly bridge the gap is to stand in the middle of it, completely exposed. To say this is who I am, and hope that the person on the other side is brave enough to say it back. It took a 7-foot-tall alien general with bioluminescent skin to teach me how to be human. It took her laughter to show me that joy is a universal constant, more fundamental than gravity or time. I stopped the recording. It was short, but it was enough. I wasn't a diplomat anymore. I was a witness. I walked over to Zalia and held out my hand. She took it, her long fingers intertwining with mine. There was no flash of golden energy this time, no shock wave that shattered the walls. Just a quiet, steady warmth, a harmony. We're about 48 hours from Earth, I said. My parents are going to want to take you to a barbecue. Are you ready for that? I have studied the cultural protocols of the barbecue, Zelia said, her skin flaring into a playful pink. It involves the ritual consumption of charred animal proteins and the discussion of local sports teams. I believe I can execute the maneuver successfully. Just don't tell my dad his grilling is tactically inefficient, I warned. He's sensitive. I shall be the soul of diplomacy, she promised. I looked out at the stars, feeling the hum of the ship beneath my feet. I realized then that I had changed. I wasn't looking for the shadows anymore. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was just here. I reached out and adjusted the settings on the room's lighting, dimming it until the only light came from the stars and Zilia's skin. I didn't need the screens or the reports or the distractions. I just needed the resonance. Looking back on the last 6 months, I realized that I used to measure my life in increments of safety. How many days without an incident? How many years until retirement? I was a man waiting for the end of the story before I'd even started writing it. I thought that by staying detached, I was being professional. I thought that by keeping my heart behind a security clearance, I was being smart. But you can't truly know someone until you're willing to let them hurt you. You can't feel the light until you've stood in the dark and admitted you're cold. For so long, I was terrified that if I let Celia in, I would lose my identity, my culture, my very self. But the opposite happened. By embracing her, I found the parts of myself I'd buried under years of beige reports and diplomatic doublespeak. I found the music I'd stopped hearing. We're all so afraid of the other, the alien, the stranger, the person who doesn't look like us or speak like us, that we never realize they're just the mirror we need to see ourselves clearly. The galaxy is a big, terrifying place, filled with pulsars that can erase a planet and empires that can crush a soul. But in the middle of all that darkness, there are these tiny, beautiful moments of connection that defy all logic. That's the real diplomacy. Not the treaties, but the shared laughter in a quiet room. Not the borders, but the hands held in the dark. I wonder, as you look out at the stars tonight, or even just across the dinner table, at someone you think you know perfectly well, when was the last time you were truly brave enough to be seen? Not the version of you that is polished and professional and safe, but the messy, real version that makes mistakes and has terrible jokes. What would happen if you stopped being a ghost in your own life and finally let the light in, even if it meant risking everything? I reached over and turned off the final light in the room. In the darkness, Zilia was a constellation of violet and blue, a living map of a world I was still learning to navigate. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her ears relaxing against my neck. "I love you, Caleb Thorne," she whispered. "I love you too, Zilia," I said. And as the ship jumped into the final stretch toward Earth, I didn't look back. I just held her hand and watched the stars, waiting for the sunrise. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving he had made during the long hours in the medical bay, a clumsy but recognizable model of the heart tree. He placed it on the windowsill, where it caught the silver light of the passing nebulae. He didn't need to say anything else. The silence between them wasn't a gap anymore. It was a conversation.